So, over 500 individuals in India are now declaring a yearly gross income of over 100 crore rupees. But, at the exact same time, we have millions of youth who are just so desperate for a single entry-level government job that they're willing to pay underground syndicates millions of rupees to get a leaked test paper.
Yeah, it's a wild juxtaposition. And welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Exactly. If you're a UPSC aspirant lacing up your boots for today's study routine, this is for you. We aren't just reading today's news stack, right? We are really decoding it, finding those structural mechanisms behind the headlines, and, giving you that analytical edge for your mains answers.
Right, because that staggering contrast between, extreme wealth and extreme desperation, it's basically the invisible thread running through everything we're going to dissect today. We're looking at governance, economic structural flaws, grassroots empowerment, and, yeah, the geopolitical chessboard.
Absolutely. And to frame this entire discussion, I want you to write this quote down because it is absolute gold for an essay paper. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right. Keep that ringing in your ears as we start with this massive crisis of trust. Because following the devastating NEET-U controversy, the union government tabled the public examinations, Prevention of Unfair Means, Amendment Bill 2026, and, they are bringing out the heavy artillery.
They kind of have to, right? A state just cannot function if its youth genuinely believe the meritocracy is rigged. So the bill draws this very sharp legal distinction between an individual student who cheats and the organized crime syndicates that actually facilitate the leaks.
Right. It's separating the symptom from the disease.
Exactly. For individuals caught in the crossfire, the penalty is severe, like up to 10 years in prison and a fine scaling up to 50 lakh rupees.
Which, honestly, that alone destroys a career completely. But the structural hammer really falls on the syndicates, right? Like the actual rackets.
It does, yeah. If investigators can prove the involvement of an organized paper leak racket, the bill mandates a minimum sentence of 7 years, and that can easily stretch to 10, plus a crippling fine of up to 10 crore rupees.
Wow. 10 crore.
Yeah, but, penalties mean nothing without process.
Yeah.
So they've mandated a strict 60-day deadline to complete these investigations. And on top of that, states are being empowered to set up fast-track courts to wrap up the trials within 3 months.
Which is huge because, if you're structuring a governance answer, you really have to note that justice delayed in an academic leak means an entire generation basically loses a year of their lives.
Right. The courts have to move as fast as the academic calendar.
Exactly. But punishment is really only half of the equation here. The state is also attempting this massive technological overhaul. Like, right after the NEET-U disaster, the K. Radhakrishnan Committee dropped 101 recommendations to just rebuild the National Testing Agency from the ground up.
Yeah, and the underlying logic of those recommendations is basically trying to remove human touch points from the exam delivery chain. Like, they proposed this system called CPPT.
Which stands for Computer-Assisted Secure Pen and Paper Testing, right?
Right. Think about the old legacy vulnerability. You're printing thousands of papers at a central press, loading them into physical trucks, driving them to rural bank vaults where they just, sit for days.
And that physical transit is where the leaks almost always happen?
Precisely. So CPPT bypasses the physical transit entirely. The question papers are heavily encrypted digitally, transmitted over a secure network, right to local servers at the exam centers.
Oh, so they just print them there?
Yeah, they're decrypted and printed locally only minutes before the students sit down. So there is essentially no physical paper trail to intercept.
Right. And you couple that with the DGI exam framework they recommended, which uses Aadhaar, continuous biometrics, and AI facial recognition to stop impersonator rings. The Prime Minister even appointed Nanda Nilekani to lead a task force to build a digital public infrastructure, or DPI, for this.
Which makes sense. His work on Aadhaar makes him the obvious architect for a digital fortress like that.
Totally. But I have to push back here a bit, and I really want you, the listener, to critically evaluate this. To me, CPPT and AI biometric scanning, it feels like, well, it's like installing a state-of-the-art titanium vault because your old wooden door keeps getting kicked in.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Like, the tech is cool, but does it actually solve the root cause? Or will it just force these 10 crore rupee syndicates to, invest in deepfakes and better hacking tools?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it exposes the limits of treating governance purely as a tech problem. Encrypted servers basically treat the symptom. The root cause, the reason a family will literally mortgage their ancestral land to buy leaked paper, is economic.
Right, the desperation.
Exactly. We have this massive pool of Brilliant young minds fighting a gladiator battle for a microscopic number of government jobs. And why? Because the private sector is just failing to generate secure, quality employment at the scale of our population.
Which means we're treating a massive economic infection with a digital Band-Aid. And this leads us straight into the core of our macroeconomy discussion. If you're tracking this for your GS3 paper, the buzzword you need to deeply understand today is jobless growth.
Yeah, jobless growth. Because for the last decade, the overarching narrative has been heavily weighted toward, the ease of doing business. Deregulation, getting foreign direct investment, pushing GDP numbers up.
Right, the classic metric.
But there's a fierce debate right now that policy urgently needs to pivot to the ease of living. And the metric that really exposes this gap is employment elasticity.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of employment elasticity because that is a crucial concept for a well-argued mains answer.
Right, so think of employment elasticity as a ratio. It measures how responsive job creation actually is to economic growth. So if a country's GDP grows by, say, 8%, you'd logically expect a corresponding surge in hiring.
Makes sense. A growing economy needs workers.
But if your jobs only grow by 1% during that 8% GDP boom, your employment elasticity is incredibly low.
Yeah.
The economic engine is running hot, but it's just not pulling the employment carriage behind it.
Wow. So for a country with a demographic dividend like ours, high GDP growth with low employment elasticity it's a recipe for social unrest.
Exactly. It renders the whole demographic dividend totally useless. And the sources provide a really fascinating contrast with China on this exact metric.
Right, because we usually think of China as this unstoppable, ruthless manufacturing machine.
We do, but they are currently implementing a very strict people-first economic model through 2030. It's actually reached a point where Chinese courts are systematically ruling against massive tech companies that try to implement AI-driven layoffs.
Wait, really? The state is blocking AI layoffs?
Yeah, they're actively prioritizing employment stability and social cohesion over just unfettered market efficiency.
That is wild. And that starkly contrasts with the wealth concentration data the Ministry of Finance just released here. This is the data point that should honestly make anyone analyzing our economic structure just pause. For the assessment year 2025-26, over 500 individuals reported a gross total income of at least 100 crore rupees.
Which is just an astronomical figure for individual income.
Yeah.
And the crucial context there is the velocity of that wealth accumulation. The number of individuals in that specific 100 crore bracket has quadrupled in just 4 years.
Quadrupled! That's insane!
And you combine that with the World Inequality Report 2026, which calculates that the top 10% of the population now commands about 58% of the national income. So we're seeing this massive pooling of capital at the very top.
So let's synthesize this for a second. We celebrate when our ease of doing business rankings climb, right? We celebrate stock market highs. But if employment elasticity is flatlining and wealth is hyper-concentrating, while millions of youth are driven to the black market just to secure an entry-level clerk position, shouldn't we critically question if this specific flavor of top-down deregulation is actually building a Indian accent Viksit Bharat?
It's a very vital critique. When a centralized, capital-heavy economic engine generates high GDP but also massive structural inequality, the standard macroeconomic countermeasure is decentralization.
Okay, so pushing the power back down.
Exactly. You have to actively push economic agency, governance, and critically revenue generation back down to the grassroots, which is exactly what the government is attempting to do right now. It opens up this really fascinating dynamic in both rural and urban administration.
Let's look at the mechanisms of that decentralization then. In rural governance, the union minister has just rolled out the Indian Accent Atmanirbhar Panchayat program, alongside a digital backbone called the Indian Accent Samarth portal. And the entire philosophy here is financial autonomy for Panchayati Raj institutions, or PMIs.
Right. And to understand why this matters, you have to look at how crippled PRIs have historically been. Usually, a local panchayat has to just sit and wait for airdrop funds from the state or central finance commission.
Which means they have no real power.
Exactly. When you don't control your own purse strings, you don't really have administrative autonomy. You're basically just a delivery agent for central schemes.
So how does the Indian Accent Atmanirbhar Panchayat program change that?
It aims to help PIIs develop their own source of revenue, or OSR. The government has identified 350 specific revenue-generating projects to be rolled out over the next 4 years.
Oh, like what kind of project?
Things that involve leveraging public-private partnerships and tapping into corporate CSR funds right at the village level. And that Indian accent Samarth portal is crucial here. It's basically the digital tax collection and financial management system for this whole initiative.
Oh, I see. So it formalizes local tax collection.
Yes, it has already registered over 51 lakh local taxpayers in early adopter states, creating this transparent, truly local tax base.
Okay, so that's the rural side of empowering the roots. But there's an equally aggressive push happening in the urban space, too, driven by the Ministry of Cooperation. They're heavily lobbying the RBI to open the floodgates for new urban cooperative banks, or UCBs.
Yeah, this falls under the banner of Indian accent Sahakar Se Samriddhi, which loosely translates to prosperity through cooperation. Currently, India has about 1,450 UCBs. But the structural flaw is that about 1,100 of them are hyper-concentrated in just 3 states.
Right, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Karnataka, because the cooperative movement historically flourished there decades ago.
Exactly. But the ministry recognizes that to combat jobless growth nationwide, you really need to fund MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mega commercial banks, they often just ignore a local tailor or a neighborhood mechanic.
Yeah, the ticket size is too small for them.
Right. UCBs exist to serve those exact middle-income and low-income demographics. So the goal is nationwide expansion. However, the mechanism blocking this expansion is this administrative nightmare known as dual regulation.
Dual regulation is such a great concept to explain for the exams. How exactly does it paralyze these banks?
Think of it as having 2 different bosses with completely different rule books who just refuse to talk to each other. For all banking functions like lending limits, capital adequacy, issuing licenses, the UCB answers strictly to the Reserve Bank of India.
Okay, that makes sense for a bank.
But for its management structure, board elections, and registration, it answers to either the state registrar or the central registrar of cooperative societies.
Oh, wow. That sounds messy.
It is. This fragmented oversight leads to crippling delays in decision-making, and it makes it incredibly hard to expand or innovate. Resolving that dual regulation is basically the main hurdle to urban financial inclusion.
And when local governance actually works, the results are undeniable. Take the recent directive from the Delhi Lieutenant Governor. He formally directed the Municipal Corporation of Delhi to completely adopt the indoor waste management model.
Right, the gold standard for sanitation.
Exactly. For those tracking urban development, Indore hasn't been the cleanest city in India since 2017 by accident. They didn't just build bigger landfills. They fixed the problem at the community source by enforcing 100% source segregation of waste at the household level.
It all connects. Whether it's taxing locally through the Indian accent Samarth portal, funding MSMEs through cooperative banks, or managing waste at the ward level, sustainable development is inherently local.
It really is. It's like trying to water a giant banyan tree. If you only spray the highest leaves with water, the tree eventually dies. True resilience only happens when you aggressively water the roots.
That's a great analogy.
And speaking of deep roots, this actually brings us to a fascinating intersection of our cultural heritage, futuristic technology, and the environment.
Right, so we are seeing this unprecedented initiative to digitize India's ancient knowledge systems. The government launched the Indian accent Gyan Pharatham mission, which is just an absolutely colossal undertaking to digitize over 1.19 crore ancient manuscripts scattered all across the country.
But they aren't just scanning them into a massive PDF archive. The mechanics of this are brilliant. They are deploying advanced artificial intelligence, specifically large language script models, and highly specialized optical character recognition.
Yeah, the developers have rolled out tools like Indian accent Harathia GPT and Indian accent Pandulupi Darpen.
Right. And these AI models are being trained to read, translate, and intelligently interpret ancient scripts. It's making millennia of philosophy, science, and literature instantly accessible and searchable for modern researchers.
It's amazing. Using the absolute bleeding edge of modern tech to unlock the deepest layers of our past. It's a remarkable synthesis. However, when we look at how modern technology intersects with our current environment and economy, the picture gets, well, much more complicated.
Let's start with the macro victory, though. India has officially and prematurely surpassed its non-fossil fuel capacity targets. We achieved a 37.38% cut in emission intensity.
Which is massive in the global climate dialogue.
Exactly. It fortifies our nationally determined contributions for 2035 and gives our diplomats immense leverage, proving we're actually walking the talk toward that 2070 net zero target.
True, but macro victories often carry micro costs, right?
Yeah.
And the sources point out a pretty severe brewing public backlash regarding the government's aggressive rollout of E20 fuel.
Yeah, so E20 is petrol blended with 20% ethanol. On paper, it sounds great, it's greener, and it cuts down our massive crude oil import bills. But let's look at the mechanics of why this is actually hurting the common citizen. Ethanol is highly hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs water from the air.
Right, and it's highly corrosive to certain materials. The core issue is that the government kind of pushed E20 without properly assessing the transition costs for millions of citizens who own BS6 vehicles.
Vehicles which were mandated just a few years prior to this E20 push.
Exactly. Those non-flex fuel engines were just not built with the reinforced rubber seals and plastic components required to handle 20% ethanol.
So what happens? Citizens are reporting a 3 to 5% drop in their mileage, meaning they're basically paying more per kilometer. And worse, the ethanol is accelerating engine wear, like slowly eating away at the fuel lines.
It acts as a hidden tax on the middle class. They suddenly have to pay for premature engine maintenance just to comply with a green mandate.
It's a perfect example of transition friction. Oh, and just to give you a quick prelims bite regarding daily economics. The RBI is currently trialing 3,000 crore rupees worth of plastic polymer banknotes in 10 and 20 rupee denominations.
Oh, right. The goal there is to dramatically increase the lifespan of those smaller currency notes that suffer high wear and tear.
Yeah, but the juxtaposition here is really striking. We're using AI perfectly to preserve our past, but when it comes to the present, policies like E20 show that we're sometimes pushing aggressive green targets without fully shielding the common citizen from the immediate financial fallout.
I agree, but to understand why the government is so desperate to push E20 despite the domestic backlash, you have to zoom out. E20 isn't primarily about domestic environmentalism. It's an economic defense mechanism. It's about reducing our terrifying dependence on imported crude oil.
Because energy dependence exposes us to the brutal realities of global trade pressures.
Exactly. And geopolitics.
Which is actually the perfect bridge into our final analysis on international relations. Domestic policy is always a hostage to global dynamics, right? And the major development here is the United States imposing 10% forced labor tariffs on Indian imports under Section 301.
Right. And to decode this for a GS2 answer, we really have to look past the rhetoric and examine the strategic mechanics impartially. So, Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act essentially allows the U.S. government to unilaterally impose tariffs if they determine a trading partner is engaging in unfair, unreasonable, or discriminatory practices.
Okay, and here they are citing allegations of forced labor as the legal justification for this 10% levy.
Yes. But the timeline our sources provide reveals the actual strategy at play. This isn't just some sudden moral awakening in Washington.
Right, what happened in February?
Back in February 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a ruling that severely weakened the U.S. executive branch's leverage. They essentially limited the power of federal agencies to unilaterally interpret trade and regulatory statutes without clear congressional backing.
Oh, wow. That is the key mechanism right there. Because the U.S. Trade Representative lost some of their closed-door regulatory leverage, the executive branch is resorting to blunter instruments.
Precisely. The analysis strongly suggests the U.S. is utilizing these Section 301 tariffs as a strategic cudgel. They're trying to establish this painful baseline of permanent tariffs to systematically force nations, including India, back to the negotiating table.
To sign new, highly structured preferential trade agreements that favor the U.S., of course.
Of course.
Looking at it objectively, it's economic statecraft disguised as human rights. They are using the moral wrapper of forced labor to execute pure economic arm twisting.
In realpolitik, morality and technology are just different forms of leverage. We are actually seeing a nearly identical dynamic play out in the Middle East right now regarding energy and diplomacy. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia are in deep negotiations over a civil nuclear deal.
Right, and this directly ties into Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. Saudi Arabia knows the oil era has an expiration date. They want U.S. civil nuclear technology to power their domestic electricity grid.
Because if they do that, they can stop burning their own oil for electricity.
Exactly, they can export all of it, maximizing their revenue while they transition their economy over the next decade.
It's a smart play, but the U.S. isn't just handing over uranium enrichment technology for free. The U.S. is conditioning this civil nuclear deal on a massive geopolitical concession. They are using the nuclear tech as leverage to try and force Saudi Arabia to formally join the Abraham Accords.
Meaning they want them to permanently normalize diplomatic relations with Israel,
Exactly.
which is an incredibly fraught diplomatic tightrope, especially given the ongoing complexities and conflict in Gaza. But it perfectly illustrates the point, doesn't it? International relations are never about isolated incidents. The U.S. uses tariffs to leverage Indian trade concessions, and they use nuclear technology to leverage Saudi Arabian diplomatic concessions.
It's all connected. Energy, trade, tech, and diplomacy are really all just different currencies on the exact same geopolitical chessboard.
And that brings us to the end of today's map. Let's do a rapid-fire synthesis so you can lock this conceptual framework into your memory for your study blocks today.
Right. We started by looking at the foundations of the state, examining how the government is using harsh 10-year penalties and digital infrastructure, like CPPT, to rebuild trust and stop exam paper leaks.
But we recognize that cheating is basically just a symptom of a deeper macroeconomic crisis. Jobless growth and a shocking concentration of wealth at the top, forcing us to rethink the ease of doing business in favor of the ease of living.
Then we saw the structural response to that centralized wealth, which is decentralizing power down to the grassroots, giving local panchayats their own source of revenue and trying to untangle the dual regulation that's choking urban cooperative banks.
We marveled at how AI, like Indian accent Bharatiya GPT, is unlocking ancient manuscripts, while critically noting that aggressive environmental transitions like the E20 fuel rollout carry hidden corrosive costs for the middle class.
And finally, we mapped how our domestic need for energy independence is driven by global realities, where the U.S. uses everything from Section 301 tariffs to civil nuclear deals as raw leverage to reshape global trade and the Middle East.
You now have the underlying mechanics behind the headlines. As you close your notebooks and get ready to dive into your syllabus, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to chew on, especially for your interview prep.
Yeah, consider the ultimate paradox of what we discussed today. We are entering an era where artificial intelligence is advanced enough to read and translate millions of pages of our ancient heritage. Yet that exact same AI threatens to displace modern jobs at a rate we've never seen. The ultimate test for the Indian state over the next decade won't just be securing exam servers or tweaking tariffs. The true test will be entirely redesigning what work, purpose, and human value actually mean in an AI-driven 21st century.
The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. How we educate and employ that youth for a world being rewritten by algorithms is the defining challenge of our generation. Thank you for making us your morning study companion. Have a highly productive, intensely focused day ahead. You've got this. We'll see you on the next deep dive.